The last 24 hours of Adolf Hitler. The city above was burning. The sky was black and red with flames from burning buildings. The sounds of explosions, gunfire, and distant shouting echoed through the cold night air. Berlin was under siege. The Soviet army was closing in quickly, advancing street by street. Deep below this chaos, hidden in the dark, damp Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler sat quietly in a small, cramped room. The walls were thick concrete, stained and cracked. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows. Hitler's face was pale, his eyes sunken and tired. He no longer looked like the confident leader who had once inspired millions. His body was weak from days without rest or fresh air. His hand trembled slightly as he held a cigarette, though he hardly smoked anymore. Beside him, Eva Braun sat on a simple wooden chair. She looked calm, but her hands shook. For years, she had lived in Hitler's shadow, waiting quietly. Now, in these final hours, she was about to become his wife. At 3:30 a.m., the bunker was filled with a strange mix of silence and tension. A government official quietly read the marriage vows. Hitler said yes in a soft voice, barely audible. Eva smiled faintly, her eyes bright with tears she would not let fall. It was a brief ceremony. No music, no flowers. Only the faint noise of distant artillery reminded them of the war outside. After the ceremony, Hitler retreated to his small office. His face was drawn and serious. The room was cluttered with maps, papers, and telephones that rarely rang anymore. He sat at his desk, signaling for his secretary to come closer. With a clear voice, he began to dictate his last political testament. His tone was bitter, angry, and filled with blame. He spoke of betrayal, how Germany had been abandoned by its leaders and people. He accused the Allied forces of destroying his vision for the country. Yet despite all the anger, there was a quiet resignation beneath his words. "I accept my fate," he said slowly, "but I will not surrender. Germany must live on, even if I do not." He appointed Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor and named others to lead after him. He instructed that his body and Eva's be burned immediately after their deaths to prevent any public display or humiliation. Each word was heavy with meaning, like a final command from a dying general. Outside the bunker, Berlin was crumbling. Civilians wandered the streets in shock, children cried, and the once proud city was reduced to rubble. Throughout the morning, Hitler's closest aides came to say farewell. Faces that once showed confidence were now marked with fear and exhaustion. Joseph Goebbels, his loyal propaganda minister, stood quietly, his face expressionless. He had promised to remain with Hitler to the end. Others, like General Wilhelm Burgdorf, exchanged brief words before leaving the bunker, desperate to escape the inevitable. Hitler did not speak much. He listened as the aides reported on the war's progress. The news was grim. Soviet troops were already inside the city's outskirts. Eva Braun moved about quietly, offering cigarettes and small comforts. Despite the horror outside, she tried to maintain some normalcy. She even briefly played with Hitler's dog, Blondie, a German shepherd who had been with them in the bunker. The atmosphere was heavy. No one spoke of hope. The bunker's rooms were cold and dark, and the few windows were blacked out. Afternoon light did not reach these underground halls. Hitler spent hours at his desk, sometimes staring blankly at the maps, his hands clenched and unclenched as he fought his own despair. Eva sat nearby, reading a book silently. Occasionally, Hitler's personal doctor, Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, checked on his health, though there was little to do. The sound of artillery grew louder. Sometimes the floor vibrated from nearby shell explosions. Hitler's mood was strange, a mix of anger, sadness, and strange calm. He made small jokes, though they were bitter and dark. At one point, he asked if the Russians would feed us to the wolves. Lunch was a quiet affair. Hitler picked at his food but barely ate. His mind was elsewhere. That evening, Hitler ordered a modest dinner for himself, Eva, and the few remaining loyal staff. The food was simple: boiled potatoes, some cold meats, and stale bread. There was cheap champagne, but few dared to drink much. The mood was tense but strangely peaceful. Some talked quietly, sharing memories of better times. Others sat silently, staring at their plates. Eva wore a pale blue dress and smiled more than she had all day. She held Hitler's hand tightly. He returned the gesture with a faint, tired smile. At one point, Goebbels raised a glass and said, "To Germany may she rise again." No one laughed. The radio broadcast crackled with propaganda, urging the German people to continue fighting. Few believed the words. As dawn broke, the bunker was unusually quiet. The air was thick with tension. Hitler met with his closest officers in his private room. His voice was steady but low as he gave final instructions. He insisted that no one try to flee or surrender. "We will fight until the last man," he declared. Yet behind the words was a deep weariness. Hitler also ordered that all secret documents and files be destroyed. He wanted to erase his personal secrets, his plans, and his failures. Eva was given a small vial of cyanide capsules. She was told to take them if the end came. The guards tested the poison on Blondie, the dog. The poor animal died quickly, its death a grim sign of what was to come. Throughout the morning and early afternoon, Hitler said goodbye to his closest aides. There were no tears, only a formal politeness. He shook hands with each man, thanking them for their loyalty. Some men wept silently behind their masks. Hitler asked to be left alone with Eva in his private room. He closed the door and sat quietly, staring out at the small window that looked toward the garden above. Outside, the battle raged on. The sound of Soviet soldiers shouting and tanks rolling grew louder. At exactly 3:30 p.m., the sounds of the bunker were interrupted by a single gunshot. Minutes later, an aide cautiously opened the door. Inside, Hitler lay on a sofa, slumped and lifeless. A pistol was loosely held in his right hand. His uniform was stained with blood.